Well, welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Digital Difference. And today, as Chris mentioned, we're going to be covering design thinking and how that can unlock innovation. So to kick off, Ollie, how's it going today? You doing well?
Yeah, not too bad. It's our first live podcast that we've ever done, so I'm slightly nervous. What I will say to everybody is just bear with us, because usually this takes about 2 hours for us to record, and we stumble on a lot of our words. So we're going to have to be really on it today. But yeah, if you guys just bear with us, and we'll try our best to get through it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I don't know if highly edited is the word, but definitely edited is what they normally are. So we'll try our best. But of course, welcome to all of our audience today and all of our listeners who are listening at any point. So as Chris mentioned as well, we should get some time to answer questions at the end today. So do put them in the chat throughout and we'll grab those at the end. A quick intro to those who are new to the podcast. So I'm Scott. I've got over 10 years working in development, design, and building products and software systems with companies. I now run Fluff, and we develop all things digital, really. So we create digital products, software solutions for our clients. We combine design, development, strategy, and all that good stuff to deliver some really cool and engaging experiences. Do you want to give a quick intro, Ollie?
Yep. So I am an experienced learning designer within the financial services. Before that, I was a film production technology officer. So I used to work. I've worked across the world. I've worked in America and across the UK as well on several different film projects. And more recently, I've just been helping Scott with Fluff Digital, and trying to get us set up and started. I would say at the end of this, if anybody wants to reach out and have a chat or anything like that, please feel free. We're always here to have a chat and talk to anybody that wants to.
Awesome. So before we get into what design thinking is, Ollie, I thought we'd cover kind of what the problem is at the moment, what it tries to solve really, and cover some of those aspects. So I think it's fair to say, Ollie, isn't it, that it kind of tries to attack the problem in quite a lot of companies at the moment, where there's either really solution first thinking or just a real lack of innovation, especially from the higher levels a lot of the time. Is that what you see as well?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think it's trying to break that cycle of the standard processes that everybody uses usually, and it's kind of approaching it with an innovative solution.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It really is about unlocking some innovative solutions, isn't it? Rather than kind of focusing on what can quite often be the quick wins or the quick fixes or solutions that people have used lots of times in the past, about really trying to unlock a new way of thinking about how to solve problems. And I know you talked to me in the past about a really interesting truck story. I wonder if you want to share that.
Yeah, sure. So some of you might have already heard this if anybody's sort of looked into design thinking before. But it's a regular example that people use for design thinking, and I think it outlines what design thinking is quite well. So the story is a truck's driving down the road and it approaches a bridge, and it thinks it can get under there, and unfortunately it gets stuck. We've seen it many a time. Happens quite a lot in Swindon, actually. And so the emergency services turn up, and what they try to figure out is whether they're going to take apart the truck or they're going to take apart the bridge. So, the emergency services are arguing between each other. This is how they usually do it. So as they're discussing what's the best approach to do this, a boy walks past and stops and has a look, and then walks up to the emergency services and says to them, "Why don't you let the air out of the tires?" And by doing so, they let the air out of the tires. The truck could drop down that extra foot and then could fit underneath the bridge. And I think it's a perfect way that defines design thinking, because it's about that thinking outside the box, which in this case is the boy coming up with an idea, which is not just about approaching the solution with the standard processes. It's kind of think outside that box and how you're going to go forward with that.
I love that story because it really is about breaking thinking patterns, isn't it? Within and that's really where design thinking is positioned, all about kind of external input and kind of breaking the cycles that we go through naturally. Yeah. And as well, I mean, the reason why we wanted to bring this up today is because innovation's so important at the moment with the pandemic that's currently going on. The whole landscape of what we do and how we operate within our businesses has changed. So it's now more important than ever to really think about how your customers are going to be engaging with you in the future and think about how that might impact what you're delivering. So to kick us off, Ollie, did you want to have a stab at describing what design thinking is in a nutshell?
Yes, definitely. So before we say anything about design thinking, I think it's really important to understand that it's user focused. And a lot of the time, thinking about when you think about approaching projects and processes, a lot of the time it's not user focused. It's about what the project thinks is best for the user. So kind of in a nutshell, there's sort of many different variants of design thinking. But what it actually is, it's basically a process in which we seek to understand the user. And, we usually challenge the assumptions and challenge usual processes, and then we try and redefine those processes and redefine the problems that we find within those. And what we come out with is usually alternative strategies and solutions from that. Do you say that that's sort of the best way to describe it, Scott?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, we use that word user a lot, don't we, from the design, from a product point of view. But what we're, I guess, talking about primarily is customers, aren't we? It's about really focusing on the customers and their problems rather than just jumping to solutions. And so there is quite a prescriptive kind of set of steps, isn't there, Ollie? And that starts with empathize. Yeah,
absolutely. There's actually a variety of different ways that people usually approach it, but there's 5 sort of key phases that people go through with design thinking, and that's empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and then test. This is also usually done within like a week. So although it's what I'm going to say, it's going to sound like quite a lot, this usually happens within a week. So there's quite a fast turnover with all this. So the first stage is empathize, like you said, Scott, and it's basically about understanding the user, and it's gaining that empathetic understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. It's consulting with the experts within the area that you're trying to solve, by observing and engaging and empathizing with people and understand their experience and their motivations. It's kind of also immersing yourself within that environment as well. Really trying to get that understanding of what the issue is. And it blends quite well. I always find that with empathize, define, and ideate, which are the first 3 phases of design thinking, they also blend quite well together. So empathy is crucial to the human-centered design process and design thinking, and it allows design thinkers basically to set aside the assumptions that processes usually carry and gain an insight into the user needs. And we find this quite a lot. So for instance, if I'll try and use an example throughout this whole process. So if we, for instance, were creating, a company came to us and said they want a social platform within their business, you'd go into the business itself and go into the user and understand what the user would want from that social platform. And then going forward, it would then be coming on to the define stage.
Like these 2 stages as well, that I think these are probably the more important phases, aren't they? And they exist to kind of break people out of that habit of jumping to solutions. And like you said, Ollie, breaking the assumptions that a company will quite often have about their customer base or their user base. So by starting this, you're really kind of trying to ignore what solution you're aiming for first of all, and start right with let's break it down and really start thinking about our users first and foremost, and kind of going with no assumptions and start with a clean shape.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the issue is as well that we often see is that people don't ever use this empathize stage within normal when they approach a project or a process. It's all about that assumption. I'm going to keep using that word assumptions, but it is all about the assumptions that the project knows best and the business knows best. And that's always not the right way. Well, I've actually, in my experience, I find it's never the right way, because you're building a product for a person, then you're telling them what you think's best for them. And in the end of the day, what's best for someone is, they know what's best for themselves. So it's a step, it's a really crucial step. And I think it's always missed. So, we'll go on to the define stage now. And this is why I say it blends quite well with the empathize, because you're basically with the define stage, you're taking all of the data that you've gathered from the empathize stage, from the sort of the user engagement, and you're now sort of trying to find the core values of what your platform's going to look like, or what this stage is going to look like. Again, I'm going to use my example of building a social platform within a business. So really within the design stage, you'd put together the information you've created and you've gathered during that empathize stage. You would analyze the observations that you've had, and you kind of try and synthesize those issues into like the core problems that you found. And then this is where you're trying to define these core problems and define also the ideas around how to fix those issues. And that's where it also blends in quite well with the ideate stage. It will help you sort of, or help the designers within your team gather great ideas and establish like the features and functions of what you're trying to produce. So within this stage, I think it's quite good to think, if we have a social platform, after you've gathered your user data, for instance, you're going to have to try and figure out what the user wants from this social platform. And if they have a current social platform there, what's not working, and, what's the core problems, and, what are the solutions to those problems. And this obviously blends quite well with the ideate stage. As we move on to the ideate stage, which is the third stage in the design thinking process, you're going to start generating the ideas as to how to fix this. So, you've grown to understand your users, you've grown to understand their needs, and you've analyzed and synthesized some of the observations in the within the define stage. And now you need to create a sort of human-centered solution. These ideas are sort of like the most innovative part of the process, and they're created quite often with the idea of trying to think outside the box and identify the new solutions that you can kind of process. So, excuse me, with this stage, it's kind of like brainstorming these ideas. I usually find that you will have a team who will sort of go into a room for a couple of hours and brainstorm. They'll come out with as many ideas as problem as possible. And the best thing is to think that no idea is a bad idea, and it's a sort of a cliche thing to say, but it really isn't. And you have to throw everything on the table, have to think outside the box. Maybe you're going to come with it from a completely different angle. So in this stage, you're going to try and figure out what's the best idea, if we're going back to my example again, as to how to build this social platform, for instance, that we've decided to go to. And you'll have many, many different ideas. So you'll pick the one that you guys will agree is sort of the best, that you think is the best. And this is the third stage. I'd also usually say that this is day 3. Within
so
that.
Just to sorry, I cut you there, but just to kind of recap then. So like, I guess empathize is gathering data, or at least gathering as much data as you can. Then step 2 is define, right? So that's taking the data and kind of shaking it out and seeing what you can ascertain from that data.
Yeah.
And then ideate, which is kind of taking those assumptions, or not assumptions, but taking that information you've now got and thinking about how best to solve the problem with that information.
Absolutely. And it's just brainstorming those ideas in the best way possible. And it's however you want to gather those ideas. But it moves quite well onto stage 4 then, which is the prototyping of the ideas. Now, when I say prototype, it's not like a usual alpha build that you would create where you'd spend weeks and weeks and weeks on it. It's really inexpensive, massively scaled down version of what you'd usually do to prototype. It might be that we'll talk about tools later, but it might be something like just using a few sketches on a piece of paper, to building something in PowerPoint, to using any sort of design tool, if you will, to create something, or even just jotting down a few words on a Word document. It can be used in any way, but it's really inexpensive, and it's sort of something that you'd only spend a day on. But it would basically just be prototyping that, so you could then go on to your 5th stage, which would be your final day, which is your test, and that would be sending out to your stakeholders. And really important this stage, I think, because obviously your stakeholders and maybe your test audience, your user testing audience, would want to see what you've sort of created and agree that this is the best way to proceed. So then you can actually go into that beta build of whatever you've prototyped. Now, this doesn't always work. So these 5, you might go through this week of design thinking, and then almost immediately people say, no, do you know what, this idea doesn't work. And this is the beauty of design thinking, is it's a cycle. It can be repeated as many times as possible until you come to the right solution. I think the whole point of design thinking is to sort of get everybody on board with a solution up front. And it's kind of, instead of, it's sort of that customer focused agile, if you will, getting everybody on board in thinking and approaching a project within an agile way, and getting that solution sorted and agreed upon up front. So you're not spending the next 8 weeks, 9 weeks going backwards and forth with different stakeholders, and then the stakeholders decide they don't like what you've produced, and then by that point you've got a lot of time that's run out.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of like customer focused agile, isn't it? It's designed to be pretty iterative, and in a lot of ways, if you get to the test stage and you've learned that actually the whole approach doesn't work, at the very least you've learned a lot about your target market, which is invaluable in this day and age.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the most important thing about this stage as well, it's about promoting innovation and innovative thinking and approaching like new ways of doing things. We often find in businesses at the moment that they're stuck in a loop of these old processes. I know I mentioned this before, but that everything has a sell by date, and you can only produce and you can only like use a certain process so many times before it starts running out, or it becomes ineffective. And I think design thinking just allows you to approach every single project or every single thing that you do in a new way. And it's not just, I think people get confused with design thinking, that they think it's just about sort of creative. I know I used it for building a social platform, for instance, but it can be used in any sort of businesses, and it can identify multiple strategies. So, even if you've gone through that process and the first 2 cycles people didn't like what you came up with, doesn't mean that it's not going to be able to apply to another project that comes up. So, immediately you've come up with several innovative solutions. And it can really help businesses grow, and allows businesses to sort of have that agile solution and those prototypes in place.
Yeah, and like you said as well, it's not just for specific problems, but actually anyone can use this as well. It's not just designers, is it? Like anyone in business can really use this with the right people around them to fix almost any problem that they're approaching, especially if it's a new problem that they haven't seen before, and they're thinking how best to solve it.
Yeah, definitely, and it's all about that sort of ongoing experimentation as well. A lot of the time I don't think that companies take enough risk and don't experiment enough within these areas. And design thinking allows that. It gives you that opportunity to become a bit innovative and to start experimenting with innovative ideas. And we're not saying that they're always going to work, but at least you haven't spent loads and loads of time on it. And like I said, usually these things take about a week to go through one cycle. And, you've come up with so many different innovative ideas. And then the next week, you can kind of go back to your drawing board and do the whole cycle again. And it might not even take that long, because with the original cycle, you've already done the empathize stage. Maybe you've missed a couple of things, you can go back, but it doesn't mean you have to spend a whole lot of time. So those cycles can get even shorter. So maybe you can produce 2 cycles within a week. And it really works really well. I think it kind of brings those innovative ideas to life across loads of different projects and processes, and it makes, I find anyway, it really does help a business grow and become more progressive and forward thinking.
Yeah, I think it works well for companies of all sizes, really. I mean, almost all global companies use this strategy at the moment and this mindset. And it's, as we said, it's especially great for when you have either a new problem or you want to look at an existing old one. I think framing the problem rather than just having a big area of improvement in mind is really effective. And like you said, Ollie, there are definitely ways, and we'll cover one in a little bit about how you can structure an approach with design thinking in mind. But with that mindset in place and hopefully starting to get embedded throughout your company a little bit more, the most important thing to think about embedding it in the first place is that actually just getting started often beats being 100% right in these instances. I think companies, like you said, there's that level of risk, but actually just opening up to a mindset. There's often this frustration that we see where they feel like, or some companies that are a little bit stuck in their ways feel like everything needs to be aligned for them to move into a more innovative way of working. Yeah. But it's just not the case, is it, Ollie?
No, definitely not. definitely not. I completely agree with that, Scott. So, Scott, let's move on to when and how do we think that it works really well?
Yeah, so I mean, it applies to such a broad area. I think one of the places that works really well at is where it's kind of, as we said before, solution first or existing solutions kind of mindset is prevalent. So perhaps if you've got certain people in the industry, especially those that are looking after the innovation, have a way of working where they'll quite often come with a solution rather than thinking about the problem and taking a step back. And we see this a lot, especially in bigger companies where they're quite meeting heavy. There's this focus a lot of the time where people will just bring solutions to the table without much thought around what they're actually solving. And like you said, that a lot of time could be wasted in developing those solutions if they're not tested. And it's a great place to bring testing in. So, I mean, Agile's thrown around a lot, but actually just having a mindset like design thinking alongside what you're doing is a great way to introduce some of the more Agile mindset pieces into the puzzle.
Yep, definitely.
And another problem that we see quite a lot is where Waterfall is being masqueraded as Agile. We've seen a lot of companies where they'll say they're Agile, and actually they're just applying small little terms or misusing terms and actually just delivering long waterfall processes. And
yeah, definitely, Scott, sorry, just step in there, but don't you find that a lot of companies use things like maybe sprints and stuff, but they're still, the overall project will be a waterfall project, but they call it Agile because they think they're doing 2 week or every sprint every day. So they think all of a sudden, we're working in an Agile way and we're sorting out maybe resource in different areas, but quite often it is just waterfall. There is still the stages of not even using design thinking, it's kind of that delivery from inception to delivery. And like I find that like you said, it is waterfall, but it's just they're trying to just give it a little spin. And I think a lot of companies do that and don't really understand what Agile is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about design thinking is it can help to disrupt that. So just by kind of substituting one of those sprints, you might find that a bit of time spent on stepping back and looking at the problem actually helps to break some of that thinking. But yeah, you're totally right. The sprint model is great when the end goal is a little bit loose as well. But yeah, there are a lot of companies still delivering waterfall in that way, for sure. And like you said as well, it's cheap to do. I mean, there's very low investment in this, and at the very least, you'll learn something about your target market. So, and that's always a good thing in my book. So we talked about kind of what design thinking is, and ultimately being a mindset. But we've got kind of what we've seen is that there's almost like a toolkit you can pull from, isn't there, Ollie? And there are a bunch of tools that you can use at each stage of the process to really help you to deliver on those stages as well. Did you want to cover off some of the more effective ones that we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's many different tools you can use, and these different tools will apply to depending on the project that you're delivering at the current time. So that it might not all work as well as they could do. But we'll go through each one and we'll try and I'll just go through each tool that we can use for each phase.
I think so. Some of these as well, like it's about the tools, isn't it? And having that toolbox ready to pull out at any point. If you've got the toolbox there, you can apply whatever tool is. Some of these just won't work for some situations, but it's about knowing the options that are there. Yeah,
and it's about having many. And we're only going to go through a few, but obviously there's loads and loads of options that you can use. And it's just about sort of investigating that for yourself and what's best going to apply for your project or your process that you're kind of investigating or trying to change. So for instance, with the empathize phase, I think with that sort of user testing in mind, it's great to create personas originally. You want to get that sort of user experience nailed down. And I think personas can really help do that. It's understanding who your target audience is, what type of people are working within that audience, what they do, and then building that persona around them, and then aiming your product at that persona. And it's also getting that define stage and into that ideate stage, and really go and keep referring back to that persona as to is this going to fix the problem for this person that you've created? And I think that's the best way of kind of going out into the business. And we talked earlier about discovering different solutions, and discovering the different problems and solutions that people are usually finding within the business at the current time. So it's creating the personas around that. Interviews, perfect for this, I think. I would always encourage people to go and interview as many different people as possible with it at this when you're in the empathize stage. It's really important, I think, just to kind of understand who your target audience is, who your users are, your end users are, and it also helps build that persona as well. So, I mean, I think this can kind of help on two levels. It can help on building the personas, and it can also help within your design and your define and ideate stage. And then, getting feedback as well, understanding the current processes that are out there currently, and getting the feedback generally of what's working, what isn't within those current processes. Or, if there's a platform, for instance, you're building a platform at the time, what's working within that platform, what isn't.
Yeah.
Just getting general feedback from the end user, because like I said before, it's all about the end user. You need to understand what's working for them, what isn't, and feedback is probably the best way of doing that.
Feedback's a great, easy place for a lot of companies to start as well, isn't it? Especially those that are slightly larger, or especially those that are B2C actually as well, because a lot of them will have already likely been relying on things like review platforms, Google reviews or any others, or even just feedback coming in from their customer service teams, and just assembling all of that good data and really analyzing it, especially for those companies that maybe don't look a lot at what's coming through there and just have their customer service teams filter through what's needed to be actioned. But actually just looking at that data is a great way to start. And then you fold on other tools like, as you said, interviews and building some personas from them. And you can get a really rich insight into who your target market is, can't you?
And I think companies know that it's really important, because obviously you have jobs like data and insights analysts that are out there at the moment, and they're kind of doing this job already, but it's just about using design thinking, using their role within design thinking to kind of get that upfront stage, instead of using it actually probably where people use it at the test stage and when after the product's been released. It's kind of using it before the product's been released and going out and saying, well, what's working, what isn't, getting that insights data back. So I think companies obviously do see the importance of having that evaluation data or that insights data. It's just getting the feedback at the right time. It's getting it up front more than at the end, if you will. And so the next stage is sort of the next phase is define. Again, you'd have to define your personas. And I think that the empathize stage, the ideate stage, I think, like I said before, they all blend in quite well together. So again, it's going back to after you've gone through the interviews and the feedback stage, it's kind of going back to your personas, redefining who that person, that target audience you're looking for is, and constantly changing, updating that persona. And it's also then starting to run team sessions, going through everything together, understanding what the core issues are at the time. So, team sessions are the best because innovative ideas coming from just one person are limited, but innovative ideas coming from several people can really get to a solution quickly.
Yeah. Again, in terms of like filtering that raw data that you've got from the empathize phase, there's nothing like getting people in a room as there and really talking through it together. And just going back to the persona stage again, I mean, I think personas are such a great tool because they not only capture a real snapshot of who your target audience is, and you may have several personas for several different target markets, but you can use them to really kind of hold yourself throughout the process, can't you? I mean, even right through to the testing stage, before you've even given it to your audience, and hopefully there's some real people there. You can use them even just to test and validate those ideas there as well.
Definitely, and it also brings once you get to that test stage as well, it brings the user to life for the stakeholder. Often the stakeholder doesn't quite understand who the target audience is, and like I said before, there's a lot of times where people just stakeholders will just go through and decide what the best solution is for anybody without doing that sort of empathize stage. So it kind of brings it to life, and it kind of drills home, that you're actually building this product for somebody, and it's not just a product that you think might work, and it's not just about insights data at the end. It's about understanding those issues and those solutions up front. And then we can move on to the ideate stage. I said before that I really like getting people into a room and just brainstorming, but obviously with the tools you can use with that, it's kind of, whiteboards, sticky notes, get people into a room, brainstorm as much as you can, virtual whiteboards, storyboarding, There's loads of different things. I mean, there's loads of different tools you can use, PowerPoint, if you will, but I'll leave that stage up to you, really. I think it's quite self-explanatory.
And just to jump in there quickly, I mean, some of the more visual aspects as well are really key, aren't they? Just getting people to get visually together and try and break down some of that more boring work is actually pretty key in terms of getting people excited and engaged about this process.
Oh, definitely, and also it's that key word, engagement, as well. And if you get several people into a room and you start talking, you get people more engaged within the idea. Whereas if it's just one person or two people and you're kind of speaking over the phone or you're in a Teams chat, often doesn't work too well. Maybe this is where COVID's kind of affecting innovation, but we won't ever know, really. But we can then move on to that next stage, which is prototyping. If you're building a product, for instance, I mean, I can only say it from our perspective at the moment when we're building web apps and mobile apps and things like that. So we use things like Figma and Adobe CC. High fidelity, you need kind of that sort of high fidelity, quick and accessible software. Personally, I think, Scott, do we use anything other than Figma, really, and Adobe to sort of prototype? I don't think we do, really.
No, I mean, like you said, there are a bunch of tools out there, aren't there? But I think the other thing is on the end of the scale that we've been looking at, we reach for tools that let us build really high quality things that look like they're going to look. And that's often actually because of the client work we're involved in. But it's worth saying as well that there are a load of tools, aren't there, for those teams that are not so technical, especially like if you're just in a company that doesn't have a design or a development team and you're looking at using design thinking to prototype maybe a new way that you approach your service. There are other ways to prototype without worrying about learning a whole new set of tools, especially the more technical ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it doesn't just need to be about building a product or building a digital product. It's about, you could just be writing down on a piece of paper, for instance, like, sketching or doing a simple outline on PowerPoint. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to have a design to it. And I think this is where, again, I want to go back to, design thinking is often mistaken for creatives. It's not just a tool for creatives. It can be used for anything. So, you can use any sort of like office tools to kind of mock up your prototype as well. And then we move on to the final phase, which is testing. So the tools you can use there, user testing, obviously, which is great. You want to test your prototype on the actual user that you've gone to within that emphasize stage, because you want to see if it's actually met their needs. You again go back to the interviews and give the prototype after the user testing. Go and interview the person, say, has it worked for them? Might not have done, might have done. You never know. Video conferencing. There's loads of different tools for testing. General face-to-face meetings, but these tools are really, really good just to sort of figure out if it's actually worked, and if not, you go back to that emphasize stage.
And actually, like, thinking about it, in many ways, the pandemic has almost opened up it's almost leveled the field in terms of what testing is available to you, hasn't it? I mean, in-person testing is known to be very effective, and I think if you can get people in the same room as you to actually to gauge their response and have that extra level of body language and everything else that you're looking for is really useful. But equally, a lot of the high tech solutions that we see these days, and again, a lot of them are pretty accessible in terms of off the shelf solutions. Folding them in with remote people is actually pretty easy. So, for example, there are things like eye tracking and you can use to really validate some of your prototypes. Again, there's a huge sliding scale here, isn't there? And you can really pick whatever one works for you. But in many ways, getting more users to actually test your final prototype has been, in many ways, easier than ever, because we can now all do it remotely, and everyone's so kind of clued up to using the remote software as well.
Definitely, and that real time sort of sharing as well has really helped with this, especially within COVID times. It's just all getting that Excel spreadsheet, for instance, and just typing ideas into there, but everybody being able to put their part, play their part, and share their ideas all at the same time. Miro, very, very good tool, Scott. Something that we use quite a lot, isn't it? Yeah. And that can be used throughout as well. So there's so many tools. I don't want to spend too much time on it, because it's literally going to be about finding the right tool for you and what works for you. And and we can tell you kind of what we use, but I mean it might not apply to your area and on your business. So yeah, we'll leave that up to you really, but there are so many tools out there that can really help you. And like you said, Scott, it's nowadays with COVID and stuff like that, there's so many tools out there, and everything's kind of going online that you will never be stuck for a tool to use during this process and while you're kind of going through the 5 stages of design thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to underline that, I think, like you said, that there are tons of tools available. And the great thing about this toolkit, when you start looking into it, is that it takes what seems like quite a scary and open-ended concept like empathize, which is quite a key stage to get right, and breaks it down into more manageable steps. Suddenly, when you think of personas as a target to get to, that's quite a manageable piece to get to. And once you've developed some personas, you're quite a way of the way through that empathize process. So it's worth having, again, these in your toolbox ready to use and to pull out in these situations. And like you say, different teams, different industries, different setups, all of that's going to affect what ones work for you, especially for again, this works as well for service-based industries as it does for any products or anything like that. So there are a bunch of different things you can use, and a lot of them are as technical or as non-technical as you need them to be.
Absolutely.
So that's really cool. So one of the things we want to talk about now was that while we've discovered that design thinking is really a good practice that can be put into place anywhere, and it's fairly high level, apart from the 5 stages, there's a variety of ways of actually how to approach it. There's this thing called design sprints that was first created by Google, and it's really almost a way of, or a set of steps, more rigid steps of putting design thinking into place. If you think of design thinking again, more of a mindset, the design sprints are almost like the recipe to follow to actually get to a final solution. And there are different variants of this. So the most common one is the 5-day version created by Google. And it's designed basically within its entirety for you to go from a problem on day 1 or before you actually start the sprint to hopefully a validated and pretty well executed solution on the final day within 5 days. And that's the idea behind it. So it works best when you've got a lot of different people in the room and a lot of different skill sets. And again, like having just designers or developers in this process, or even product owners and other people like that, getting a variety of people in the room is really valuable here. So that could be everyone from design and dev to the product owner to stakeholders to even the C-suite, and anyone in different roles will bring something different to the table, and that's really useful in terms of making sure you get the most out this week.
I think it's really important just to say there, Scott, is it gets everybody on board early on. I mentioned it earlier on, but often you'll find in standard projects or when you're redefining processes is that you can get 3 months down the line and not everybody will be on the same page, and then you run into the problem of, okay, well, now we have to go back to sort of that ideate stage and sort of produce new ideas and things like that. And I think that this process really helps sort of get everybody on board earlier on, so that you can then go on and go into that sort of alpha build of that process and not have any of these issues where people don't quite agree on what the actual output is. And it can really save you a lot of time.
Everyone look for the ride, doesn't it? It's a really useful step just to get voices in the room, especially maybe those that are a bit more skeptical about design thinking or how it can apply. Showing them firsthand, even for a small fraction of this week, will be a really good way of getting them on board, I think. So to break it down, the 5-day version's pretty straightforward, and there are plenty of resources we can share after to help you follow this more concretely. But as a very quick overview, so the Monday essentially starts with making a map. So you really define the solution, the problem here. You really define the problem, outline who your customers are, where the different problems are going to be, what maybe is out there at the moment, and really choose a target of what you want to solve. And this can be quite a key point in itself, because a solution may be pretty broad. I keep saying solution. A problem may be pretty broad in terms of its scope. So if not only for the week, but also for a successful product as well, you want to make sure that you're really picking a very specific problem within that problem area to solve. And that's really what day 1 is about. So it's as a group, really understanding, making sure everyone really understands the problem quite concretely, and picking together part of that problem that you think you can effectively solve within a week. So once we've got a good idea of what the problem is, then day 2 is all about ideas and generating ideas. So this will be working together, working in groups, working alone, a variety of different things, and essentially kind of sketching some ideas of how you might go about solving this. This can also involve some light research as well on who you're what problem you're solving, what the users are like. But again, most of that should have been done in day 1, really. So day 2, generating ideas. And again, there can be a variety of approaches here. And sketching really is a good way of doing that. You don't need to be the world's best designer to outline a solution here. Wednesday is about presenting and refining some of these ideas. And ultimately, you want to be ending on the end of Wednesday by picking one of these ideas to run with for the rest of the week. Thursday is about taking that idea and then building a realistic prototype. So using all of the people in the room to build a prototype. And again, that doesn't necessarily just need to be the devs and the designers in the room. A lot of other people can bring skill sets like copywriting, or even just in terms of refining the idea even more from there. So you can get everyone really on board with this stage. And then Friday is a day completely of testing. So actually getting people in the room together to test the idea, going out to your customers and testing. And the idea is that by the end of Friday, you'll have a very good idea of what works well in your solution, what doesn't work well. Hopefully, because of the variety that you've brought together as well, there'll be some good stuff in that solution. And ultimately, as you said, Ollie, we'll have almost like an alpha stage to start iterating from as well. And this is a great first step into the Agile development cycle, almost like your sprint 0 in a way. This is kind of pre-sprint stage. So this works really well in terms of getting a good start of what you're going to be doing. I mean, where have you seen this work well in the past, Ollie?
Personally, from building learning design, I think it works wonders. So if we do have any learning designers out there who currently work within a Waterfall projects, really try and convince your stakeholders to use this and approach all projects with this sort of method. I think it works brilliantly. Just identifying the solution up front. Often I found that, I've said this before, again, going down into the project, you have 3 weeks left. Your stakeholders come back because they haven't been on board throughout the whole process. They've decided they want to make changes. And, you're having to go back to square one and, sort of try and prototype again. And it can cause a lot of stress and pressure. I think this is a massive area where it kind of cuts a lot of the time out. It cuts a lot of the issues out that you'll see later on down the project, and it just gives you that time to focus on building more than just having problems. And it gets people into it, like Scott said, it gets everyone into a room and agree on a solution. And I think that's what's the best thing. You're agreeing. It's not just about the designers agreeing on a solution. It's about your stakeholders agreeing on a solution. And it's about your users also agreeing on a solution as well. So everybody's on board. Everyone has that single minded approach of how this should look and how it should progress. And it works. It works absolute wonders, I think. And it can really take the stress away from a project.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's certainly some setup you need to do. I mean, clearing diaries for a solid week of work is quite a stretch for some companies, especially for those that might be involved, that are typically involved in a lot of meetings. But the idea is that you're going to get everyone focused for a week, and that focus will really help to drive something that's tangible in terms of its output. And I think this shortcuts a lot of the problems where we see where innovation is something on the back burner for a lot of companies, even when they've got problems that they can see in their current solutions or something that they're thinking about. This is a great way really just to shortcut some of that and getting something done within a week. And you're really aiming for kind of tangible results. The point of this week isn't just to discuss a problem over and over. And the way it's been structured is to specifically get you through the stages quickly, to get you to actually picking and whittling down options. Because I think that's another problem that a lot of companies face when they look at solving problems, and especially when you actually take design thinking as in its core within a business as well, is that it opens up a lot of options. And what this is designed to do is to really start focusing you down on testing first and foremost, just picking one, testing it and seeing where it lands basically. Yeah. And again, coming back to the other point, which is that just getting started often beats being 100% right here. It's not designed to be 100% perfect, first of all, but what you will do is get very quickly through that first cycle of essentially finding out what you need to know, testing, and then learning from that again. So it's a really, really interesting thing. And when we look at how we do this remotely, now that the pandemic is, still taking hold, I don't think this really does affect things too much. Again, the toolkit can be used in the same way it does for design thinking. Doing a lot of this remotely is interesting, and we've seen lots of approaches, nothing that's struck out as an obvious choice, but obviously video conferencing and the remote tools like Miro and others are playing a big factor in making things much more accessible for teams these days.
Definitely.
And so that kind of wraps us up with our main topic. I mean, so we've covered design thinking, and like you said, Ollie, I think it's a really good mindset that pretty much anyone can bring into a company and start thinking to bring innovation. And design sprints, which couple very nicely with this and are almost like a tactile way of getting design thinking in first and foremost. I say that definitely does take a little bit more setup, but the output can be really, really good. And within a week, you'll get something that's pretty tangible and hopefully pretty in the right direction as well.
Yeah, well, I'll say it's very design. It's a very popular way of approaching projects at the moment, and everyone's trying to bring it in. So there's a reason for that. I think everybody realizes the value of design thinking and what it can actually do for a project and for a process. So it's definitely worth exploring.
Absolutely. So I think we've got time for a couple of questions, haven't we? So there's one from Kevin. So have you guys discovered any tips to disseminate those post-it note style elements? I think Phil mentioned Miro, which we've mentioned as well. So Miro is a great tool. There are plenty like it, essentially focused around being an online whiteboard. They are a great tool to get people to visually start thinking around things. We know that post-its are a great way to break up thinking within a meeting and actually get some voices on the board as well. We've started just using them for our meetings, haven't we, Ollie? Just for catch-up meetings, even just to have something in front of us, a whiteboard that you can play around with if you need it, is a great way just to get people to actually start throwing ideas around.
Yeah, great tool. Again, it comes back to that sort of real-time sharing and creating and editing and stuff like that. So it's a really good tool to sort of if you get on a call. That's how we use it, really, isn't it, Scott? We get onto a call and then we use it for that sort of like real-time sharing and editing. Is really good.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that can really help with some of this as well is blending, especially with remote working, is blending some of that individual work and group work, and really trying to facilitate some of the remote calls as well. I know from experience, some of the quieter voices in the room can find it difficult to shine through in remote calls. So it might be that actually letting people get on with individual work for a while, especially in a group setting. Another great is when you couple it with something like Miro, just giving people 10 minutes by themselves to put some ideas on the board rather than going around the room or letting people shout in ideas, is a great way to let some of those quieter voices shine through. And another one from Julia. So I'll maybe let you take this one, Ollie. So how do you amend the process when working with multiple partners who don't agree with each other about the outputs that they need?
Oh, that's a great question. Personally, the way I approach this is I would try and get as little stakeholders involved as possible. I think the problem that you'll encounter with multiple partners is if you have too many people involved, you'll have far too many opinions flying around a room. And this is where it can become really problematic, because we talk about the whole cycle thing, but the more people you have involved, the more opinions you're going to have, the more disagreements you're going to have. And that eventually leads to time being added onto your project. So I would approach it from the beginning of trying to get as little stakeholder involvement as possible, maybe having one person as a representative from each area. It doesn't always work, don't get me wrong. And this is where the cycle approach really does come into effect, because eventually you will come to an idea. I say eventually, like it might be everlasting. It's not everlasting, but there will be, if everybody's kind of involved within this process, you usually find that everybody comes to an idea that they all agree upon. And it will only take a few cycles for that to happen. It doesn't always, it's not one of those things where you just think that everyone's just going to disagree at every round. If the first round doesn't work and everyone doesn't agree with each other, you go to another cycle of the design thinking process. And eventually, these people are trying to work together, so they will come to a conclusion. And you will find that that this process does work.
I think equally, like the whole purpose of design thinking in a way is to get away from too much opinion in there as well, especially when you focus on things like empathize and define. First of all, if you can get everyone in that process together, even if you have got differing opinions there, define the defined stage is a great way to come together and talk about facts and really start to filter out what you've actually seen with your customers as opposed to what you assume is right. And once you can agree ultimately on that and go forward to the ideate and prototype and test stages with a solid understanding of what is true and what isn't in mind, then you can start to pin things against that. And personas are another great way to do this. So again, if you can get, and this is a difficult thing in itself, but if you can get differing opinions to agree on a prototype that ultimately matches your target user, you can, again, throughout the rest of the process, forget almost about opinion coming into play. You can just test ideas against those personas, and everything comes back to, is this what the user would want, rather than is this what we think is best?
You have to remember, it all does come down to the user. This is user focused. So in the end of the day, people are all working together to try and find a solution for the user. So often this design thinking process does work because, like you said, Scott, opinions fly out the window. Don't get me wrong, everyone's going to have an opinion. We're all human, so we're all working within this process as a human, but it does take out that element of my opinion matters, and it's more about what the user think matters, what the user's opinion, and how that matters.
Yeah, totally. That's great. I think I haven't missed any questions. Those are the main two, as far as I know. If there are any others, we'll capture those and put a follow-up to this. Just before I hand back to Chris, so thanks so much for listening today, of course. Do listen to some of our other episodes. We've got a wide range of topics on there that are already up. So we'd love you to check out some of those. And of course, share the podcast. We'd love that as well if you found it interesting. There's more about us on our website. So we've got fluffdigital.com and also the digitaldifference.show. A wide range of episodes and content on there for you. We've also got an email newsletter where we give tips and advice around topics like this as well. And another big thanks, of course, to Tech Swindon. We're a very proud sponsor of Tech Swindon. They play a really key role in sort of nurturing and developing the tech community in Swindon and Wiltshire. So we're really excited to see how things progress over the coming years in that space. And of course, to Lucy, Chris, and the wider team for getting this fantastic event together.
Absolutely. And just remember, if anybody has any questions or, wants to just catch up and have a chat with us afterwards, like Scott said, come through to our website. There's loads of different ways to contact us.
I'm not sure if you guys can see me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
See and hear. Yeah.
You can see and hear me. I can't see myself, which is a little bit disconcerting, but I'm going to trust your word on it. Massive thank you from us within the Tech Swindon team for the session today, Scott and Ollie. The intent on our part when we set out the summit and what we wanted to achieve was to get content experts on board who really knew their stuff, engage with the audience and deliver a session where people could really kind of get into the crux of the detail. And that is absolutely what you delivered today. So really appreciate it. And I'm sure people will be listening back to the podcast and also investigating what else you have on offer that you can share with people. So if people are interested, as Scott and Ollie said, get on their website or get involved in LinkedIn and get in touch with the guys. A massive thank you to both of you.